Hello, my name is Dean Brown. I am the designer of B-17 Flying Fortress Leader, published by DVG, and I'm going to basically do an overview video to show you what B-17 Flying Fortress Leader is, what type of game it is, help you decide if you're interested in purchasing it, and if you have purchased it and you're looking through the rule book and all the components and cards and think that this game might be too complex, well, I want to provide you some context for the game and to help get you started opening the box and taking it out and playing it. For the purposes of this video, we'll just assume that we're going to be playing the Combined Bomber Operations campaign. It runs from June of 43 to September of 43. It defines any special rules that apply to the campaign. In this case, for 2 targets, I can roll a 1d10 and apply damage to the target before I execute the mission. It lists a number of bomber and fighter group levels that I can start with. We'll talk about that later. Initial SO points, which I can use to purchase, okay, as I said, bomber groups, fighter groups, commanders, etc. Weekly SO points that I can use again to purchase bombers, fighters, commanders, ordnance. Monthly replacement points. Every month I get a certain number of replacement points that I can apply to damaged groups. And then, how many Luftwaffe squadrons we start with, how many airfield and aircraft factories we start with, where the theaters are going to start, which I'll talk about. Do we use secondary missions? In this case, yes, so I'll talk about that. There are allied technologies that are available based on a specific campaign. Some of these technologies are used to counter some German technologies that might be generated. And then, of course, how many victory points you earn during the campaign. You can evaluate to see how well you did on the campaign. So we're going to look at the tactical display that basically is where everything in the game takes place. I'm going to start off looking at the calendar. So you can see that we're set up for June 1943. We're going to start with the first week. Each month has a certain number of weeks of missions that you can execute. You can see here that in June we have 4 weeks, so we can run missions. And from September, October, November, we have 3 weeks. December, January, February, we have 2 weeks of missions, and then March, April, May, back to 3 weeks. Basically, the weather, because we're doing strategic daylight bombing, the weather had to be pretty clear to be able to view the target and the bomb site to do the bombing. And typically there's more clear weather in the summer than in the winter months, so more missions in the summer, less in the winter. Go to map. I mentioned in the campaign that we started off with 12 Luftwaffe squadrons on the map. The Luftwaffe squadrons are placed in the hexes. Basically, you roll 2d10s, add them up. So this would be 8, and you would place a Luftwaffe squadron on the hex that that number adds up to. So we placed our 12 squadrons here by rolling our die. Basically, our targets are going to be in one of the hexes, and we'll navigate our path through to the target, and then any Luftwaffe squadrons that are either in the path or next to the path, depending on the Luftwaffe response, the bomber group will be attacked, and with the fighter escorts, will be attacked by Luftwaffe squadrons. Let's start off talking about the targets. All of the campaigns include aircraft factory targets and airfield targets. So if we look at a target card, you could see here that there's a unique target ID. So this is aircraft factory 25. Has a supply and victory point value here, which in this case is 4, which is pretty good. Aircraft factory type. Tells you what hex it's in, 16, which is 4 hexes away from the UK base. You're allowed to take 5 bombers. The damage numbers here indicate how much damage it takes to do light damage, medium damage, heavy damage, and then actually destroy the target. For this particular target, when we're bombing, we get a +1 air-to-ground bonus, which is good. Target is also incendiary, which means that if we hit it with an incendiary bomb, we can increase the damage level after all the bombing is complete by either 1 or 2 levels. In this case, if we roll a 6 or 7, increase the damage level by 1. If we roll 8, 9, or 10, increase the damage level by 2. Then there's other modifiers for the Luftwaffe response, which we'll talk about. And then flak attacks, which get rolled before the bombers do the bombing run against each bomber group. And then repair, any special keywords. In this case, there'd be 2 additional bandits over the target hex. And if this target is destroyed, there's a reserve -1 modifier on the map when we roll to place Luftwaffe squadrons, which we'll talk about. So for this campaign, we draw and place 4 airfield targets, and we'll put them up here on top of our tactical display. Our aircraft factory targets. The aircraft factory targets are special targets, though, because aircraft factories at the end of each month are going to output new Luftwaffe squadrons. So this is our aircraft factory track. We were going to put a supply counter based on the victory point value of each of our aircraft factories, and supply value, which was 4, 3, 2, and 2. So if at the end of the month we have not destroyed any aircraft factory targets, then we're going to add 3 + 4 + 3 + 2 + 2. So we're going to add 14 Luftwaffe squadrons into play. Some of them might go over here to the Mediterranean theater or the Russian theater, but and some of them could be placed in reserve in case there's ever a month where there are not enough Luftwaffe squadrons placed on the actual European map. But the majority of the new squadrons are going to be placed on the map. So, aircraft factory targets, very important. You want to make sure that you destroy as many of them as possible each month, because as you destroy them, you take a supply counter off that matches the supply point value of the targets you destroyed. So let's say we destroyed 3 targets. Then at the end of the month, in this case, we would add only 5 Luftwaffe squadrons into the game. So, very important target type. Any aircraft factory targets that are destroyed at the end of the month, they are rebuilt. So if you destroy 3 aircraft factory targets on the next month, you would draw 3 new aircraft factories again and place the supply markers back here on the track. So they're going to be something you want to focus on every month. An additional target type that's included in every campaign is an airfield target. Again, very similar attributes. For the campaigns, you draw 3 airfield targets, and we're going to put them up on our target display. Airfield targets are pretty important target set to go after as well, because as you destroy bandits, as you're flying the mission, our track increases, and then when we get to 5, we can remove a squadron from the map. But also, if we destroy an airfield target, we advance along the bandits disrupted track. So in this case, this airfield has a victory point value of 4. If we destroy that, we would slide this up 4 numbers. And so if we destroyed, for example, 1 bandit in that mission to make it 5, then we would remove a Luftwaffe squadron from the map. Again, based on either where the mission was flown to or where that last bandit was destroyed. So that determine which squadron comes off the map. So in this case, right off the bat, we have 7 targets that we can go after. Some of the campaigns, again, like the transportation oil campaign, tell you to draw additional target cards of those particular types, of which there's a lot of them. But for this campaign, we're using secondary missions. So we're going to go to the secondary mission cards that we have here. They have a specific year that they are applicable. So I already went through and filtered out and removed all the secondary mission cards that don't apply to June of 1943. So you can see here that this is a vehicle factory secondary mission that we're going to go after. So we draw 4 vehicle factory targets. We're going to put them at the top. And our goal here is to destroy at least 8 factory VPs. And we have 2 months to execute each secondary mission card. If we're successful, we get 1 SO point every week for every point over 6, which means if we're successful and hit 8, we'll get 2 SO points every week. If we destroy 10 factory victory points in those two months, then we would get 4 SO points extra every week. And plus there's a theater modifier that when we go to look at the theaters, the Med Theater or the Russian Theater, we want to advance those theaters, because as those theaters advance, it's more likely a chance that those new Luftwaffe squadrons that are being created by the aircraft factories are going to go to those theaters instead of onto our map. You can see here if we fail, then there's -1 SO point per week for every point short. So if we only destroyed 6, we would lose 2 SO points. And also there's a Russian theater modifier of -3, which means that when we roll to see if the Russian theater advances, there would be a -3 modifier, which means it would tend to push the theater back, which means that in most cases fewer Luftwaffe squadrons would go into that theater. So we're going to put that card face up on the secondary mission cards. At the end of the first month, you can place it here. And then at the end of the second month, that's when we would evaluate it and determine if we were successful or whether we failed our secondary mission, and apply the modifiers and the bonuses or penalties for the next month. So we would take our vehicle factory target cards, and we're going to draw 4 of those. And so at the start of the campaign, we have 11 targets that we can choose from to attack. So we could take our bomber groups, and if we have a fighter group, to escort it or sweep, go after that target, hex, and attempt to destroy the target. So airfield and aircraft factory targets, standard every campaign. Another type of card is the German Defense Commander card. And basically, the German Defense Commander has several attributes. He is in charge of defending the Reich. So there's a couple of different things on here that you have to look at. One is the Luftwaffe response for your every mission. So you can see here that there's a roll that you would make for that. Different Luftwaffe commanders have different ranges. So you can see here on a response of 1 to 3, this one would be poor, 4 to 7 would be average, 8 would be high, and 9 would be all out. In this case, 1 is poor, 2 to 3 is average, 4 to 7 is high, and 8 to 10 is all out. So basically, you would roll for the Luftwaffe response before every mission, and this tells you how many bandits can attack your bomber groups or your mission group on any given turn. So you would have a maximum of 2 bandits for poor, 4 for average, 5 for high, and as many as respond for all. Another important number here is the range. So, for example, if we are, let's say we're flying to a target here in 13, and our first hex is in hex 11. Well, if we are at average or poor response, only the squadrons that are in the current hex of our mission group would attack. So we would draw 2 counters from our bandit cup to see which bandits would attack. If the Luftwaffe level is high or all out, in this case, you not only draw a bandit counter for each hex, or for each Luftwaffe squadron in the current hex, but you also draw Luftwaffe squadrons that are in an adjacent hex, which is not in your path. So we wouldn't draw one here because we're going to be flying there on the next turn. But if, for example, if our response was all out, we would have to draw the 2 bandits for the current hex, plus 1, 2, 3, 4 more bandits for the adjacent hexes. So that would be about 6 bandit draws that we would make if the response level was all out. So that's a significant difference compared to average or poor. Poor, we would draw 1 bandit hex. I'm sorry, 2 bandit. We would draw the two counters for the current hex. The Luftwaffe commander also identifies the current tactics that are active. So when we draw our bandits, part of the counter at the bottom identifies the tactics that that bandit can execute. So here we have a counter that has a frontal attack, which means before any of the turns it would do a frontal attack on the bomber groups that it's attacking at a +4 modifier. This one has rockets, so we would roll 2d7 against the bomber group before any of the turns. Now we ignore the tactics unless the current tactic is active for this Luftwaffe commander. So we would ignore the frontal attack if we drew this counter because that tactic isn't active. But if we drew this bandit counter, we would execute the rocket tactic because that tactic is currently active with this commander. So tactics can have a big impact on the attacks that the bandits make. Some Luftwaffe squadrons also have some technology that they would start investing in. Some of them are special weapons technologies. Others are simple technologies like flak gun radar. The technologies typically take a couple of months before they become active. For something like the flak gun radar, that just becomes active and you have to hope that you have an allied technology to counter that, like chaff, for example. Other technologies like the special technologies like a Type 21 U-boat, there's some additional targets that you would draw that those targets are contributing to completing the Type 21 U-boat technology. So that, but if you destroy those targets before that technology is active, then that technology isn't deployed for the remainder of the game. So you can see the rule book for more details on that. So for this particular commander, not good from a response perspective. Typically going to get a higher all-out response. Bombs and rockets especially, can be devastating to a bomber group if it gets attacked, but we have no technologies, and this particular commander does have a reserve focus, which is good for us, which means we would subtract 1 for all of the new squadrons that are created when we determine where they get deployed, which means it's more likely that the squadrons will get deployed to either the theater or to our Luftwaffe reserve box. So we'll put that over here. That commander is active. Sorry. The commander is active for the entire month. And then at the end of the month, we would roll to see if he was replaced. So at the end of the month, we would roll, and if we rolled a 7 or higher, then this commander would be replaced, and we would draw the next commander and use his attributes. If we roll less than 7, then this commander would be active for the next month. And then finally, we have a set of event cards. Events are drawn before the mission, before you leave the base in the target bound flight, and then after the bombing is complete for the homebound flight, you would draw a second event card. So you would use the top event is used for the target bound flight, or when you leave the UK base. So in this case, we would add 3 damage points to the target, which would be great. And then on the homebound flight for this one, we would have a decreased Luftwaffe activity, so we would draw 2 less bandits, which is good. Some events can be helpful in this case, and other events could hurt you. For example, increased Luftwaffe activity, you would draw 2 additional bandits for any bandit interceptions. So that would be bad. So event cards are right here. We have our 2 theater tracks, our Med Theater and our Russian Theater. I mentioned that as new Luftwaffe squadrons are created, we roll to see if they would go to our map, go to one of our theaters, or they go to our reserve. Before we do that, though, we roll to see if our theaters advance or retreat. So in this case, a 9+, the theater would advance, and on a 2 or less, the theater would retreat. Again, we could have theater modifiers based on the secondary missions that would come up, or based on the commander cards. For example, Luftwaffe response reserve focus -1. No, sorry, that doesn't apply for the theater rolls. And then there's a Luftwaffe number at the bottom of each of the theater boxes. Basically what that means is there's a 20% chance, for example, that any new squadron would go to the Med Theater. Here there's a 10% chance that a squadron would go to the Russian Theater. We have our Luftwaffe 1 for our reserve, which means that there's a 10% chance that new squadrons would go into reserve. So overall, there's a 40% chance, and I guess with this particular commander, a 50% chance that new squadrons are going to go to one of the theaters or to the reserve. And then there's 50% of the squadrons would typically go onto the map and be placed again by rolling your 2d10s, adding them up, and placing those squadrons in the appropriate hex. All right, let's talk about the exciting part, bombers and fighter groups. So each of the groups that are represented in the card or in the game are historical bomber groups or fighter groups. Basically, a bomber group or fighter group consisted of 48 individual airplanes when at full strength. So you can see here, this is the 93rd bomber group. On the card shows the name of one of the aircraft that was in that particular bomber group. So here we're looking at a B-24D. So Liberators, we have some B-17s, Fs and G models, several different other aircraft types, like B-25s. So we even have an optional B-29 group, which the B-29s were supposed to be deployed into the European theater. Several different fighter groups, P-47s, P-51s, Spitfires were used in, British Spitfires were used in 42, short-range escorts, P-38s, and then there's a high-tech P-80 jet that can be used in the late campaign. Again, that's an optional. Jets obviously were not flying for the Allies over Europe in World War II, but they were under development. So this assumes optionally that that was available to help counter the Me-242s that did actually oppose the bombers and fighters, the German jets. So each of our bomber groups and fighter groups, there are 6 different levels associated with each group. This is standard if you're familiar with other DBG air leader games. So we have a recruit, green, average, skilled, veteran, and ace group. And as you can imagine, the numbers for your air-to-air attacks and air-to-ground attacks get better as your bomber groups gain more experience, which they will, especially during a longer campaign. For this campaign, I was allowed to have 1 skilled group, so I made my B-24 group skilled. Have a B-17G group here. Starting off green. The number after that represents the number of experience points required in order to upgrade to the next skill level, which in this case would be average. Each of the cards has a couple of different ranges or statuses: okay, shaken, and then unfit, which means that it basically can't do any bombing and can't go on any missions. I mentioned that the bomber groups consisted of 48 planes. As your groups execute missions, they take on damage, and that damage gets applied to your group, with each damage point basically representing 3 actual bombers or fighters. So as your bomber groups start losing strength, for example, let's say they taken 7 points of damage, then for this particular group would then be shaken. So you would use the shaken line, air-to-air and air-to-ground numbers for 7 to 9 damage points. If you have 0 to 6 damage, you use the OK status, and you would use those air-to-air and air-to-ground numbers. And then in this particular case, over 10 means that I can't do any bombing. I could fly back. Once it's flown back at the end of the mission, it cannot go on any additional missions until you're back either to shaken or okay. I also mentioned that the campaign has monthly replacement points. So let's say, for example, I had 6 damage points, and at the end of the campaign, let's see, I think I got, was that 12? 18 replacement points at the end of the month. So then I can use those 18 to take away damage from all of my bomber and fighter groups, and then start off the new month with my groups less damaged. So air-to-air numbers apply when fighting bandits. Air-to-ground numbers apply when bombing a target. Negative numbers are bad, positive numbers are good. For air-to-air, basically you roll a die, and on a roll of 10 or higher, that the group has destroyed the bandit that's attacking it. Also, there's some slow and fast speed, similar to some of the other air leader games. If your group is fast, you get to attack the bandit before it attacks you. So if you destroy it first, it doesn't attack your group. If you are slow, which the majority of them are, bomber groups especially are slow, then the bandit attacks first, and then you attack the bandit. Any hit on a bandit destroys that particular bandit group. Some of the other important characteristics, the range. You can see the B-24s have a range of 8, B-17s have a range of 6. So range basically indicates how many hexes you can go through when you are executing your mission. So if we're going to hit a target in hex 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we would need a range of 8 to get to hex 20. So the B-24s can go that far, but the B-17s can't unless they have their range extended by basically reducing the bomb load. They have a formation number, so when certain events require a formation roll, if they are out of formation, bomber groups out of formation, there's a -2 modifier for your air-to-air and air-to-ground attacks. There's a durability number, which basically means that you would subtract this durability from all bandit attacks and flak attacks. So for the B-17s, any attack against it from a bandit or flak, you would subtract 1 from their roll, which means that you're more likely to take on less damage, which is good for the B-17s. B-24s have a durability of 0, so they don't have a durability modifier. And then the final number, tonnage, indicates how much weight those bombers can carry in tonnage. So before a mission, you would arm each of the bomber groups with ordnance, and the number in the bottom right, the green, indicates the weight of the bomb. So in this case, this is 6 bomber points, or 6 in tonnage, so we can carry that on the B-17. For the B-24, for example, we could have a slightly larger bomb load, so we can carry 8 points of weight for the B-24. The bombs also, some of them have an SO point cost, which means that you have to spend your weekly SO point allocation to purchase those particular bombs. Some have a 0, so incendiary, no cost. Also have the M30, which would hit on a roll of 8 to 10, no cost. So you can take some bombs without costing any SO points. Other bombs like the M34, which has 4 numbers, which means it can do up to 4 points of damage against your target. This one costs 3 SO points. If your technology allows it on the campaign card, there are some special bombs, for example the GB4, which can only be used by B-17s. A weight of 4, cost of 4 numbers, but you get a +2 air-to-ground modifier whenever you drop this bomb on the target. So higher SO point cost, but you have a better chance of doing damage. As I mentioned, some of the aircraft factories have, had an incendiary trait, which could cause more damage after the bombing run. So you can use incendiary targets against those targets that have the incendiary trait. So again, before the mission, we would determine what ordnance we want to take. Also, there are special commanders that can be purchased, again with SO point cost, a one-time purchase. So here we have Raper for 6 points, Alkir for 3 points, and each of the commanders has different traits that apply to that particular group that he's assigned to. So this one gives you an air-to-ground modifier of +2, which is awesome. And you also get a concentrate fire tactic that's assigned to that bomber group that you can use once per mission. So in this case, you can use a concentrate fire against a particular bandit and get a +2 air-to-air modifier. You can use that tactic once, as I said, once per mission. Alkir gets a -1 flak defense modifier, so whenever flak attacks this bomber group, -1 modifier for that. So there's a whole set of bomber commanders. Again, as your group levels up to veteran or ace, you flip them over and you typically get an additional tactic that can be used for that group. And there are also some fighter group commanders, they can be used, purchased as well. So if we were going to fly a mission against a particular target, let's be bold and let's see, 16, don't want to do that one. Hex 9, okay. So let's say we want to go after our Paris aircraft factory, which is in Hex 9, which means range 2. We could take 4 bombers, which we have 4 bombers that we can assign to it. We can see the damage numbers here. It is incendiary. No Luftwaffe response modifiers. 2 dice that we would roll against our flak. There is a bandit that would pop up against that, so we would draw an additional bandit when we're over the target. And if we destroy this target, the reserve -1 trait means that we would get another -1 roll on our theater deployments. So let's assume that that's the target we want to go after. We would select the groups that we want to be involved in the mission, and for this particular campaign we would have more than 5 groups. We would select them. We would do the armament, so we would determine what bombs we want to use, and then we would place those group counters on our mission track here in the order that we want them to fly. And then for our escort, we can either have our escort fly high or fly low. If he's flying high, that means that we have to roll a 5 or higher in order for us to choose which bandits we want to intercept that are attacking us. Plus the out of the sun tactic that the Luftwaffe might be using is negated when we're flying high. If we're flying low, then on a 3 or higher roll, we get to choose the bandits that are attacking. So for example, if we had 3 bandits attacking and I was flying high and I rolled an 8, in this case I would be able to choose which of the 2 bandits I want to intercept, and then the 3rd bandit would, based on the table at the end of the column, so 2 would attack the lead bomber, so we would put that bandit there, and then we would resolve the attacks against that those particular bombers and fighter groups. Because we are attacking targets in Hex 9, we mark out the path we want to follow. In this case, we want to try to go towards the path that has the least number of Luftwaffe squadrons. So we would mark that path. Typically, you just mark it one way, and then you would fly the same path back. And then draw your event card. So in this one example, right, so we would add 3 damage points to the target already, which is nice. And then we would we would roll for Luftwaffe response, which in this case is 3, which is average, which means maximum of 4 bandits and only range of 0. So we would advance to our squadron, draw our bandit. In this case, we can intercept up to 2 bandits, so we would always intercept. Resolve the attack. The bandit would attack first, since our fighter group is slow. Roll a die. Because he's in the same hex, we would use the side with the black number up. Roll our die. On a roll of 5, 6, or 7, we would do 1 point of damage against our escort. On a roll of 8, we would do 2 points of damage. And on a roll of 9 or 10 plus, we would do 3 points of damage to our fighter group, which we would add to our card. And then our fighter group, we have a +2 air to air, so if we rolled an 8 or higher, we would destroy the bandit. And we go through 2 turns of that for this particular bandit. Other bandits, this one would have 3 turns if we drew that bandit from the current hex. So we draw all the bandit chits from the current hex first. And then if it was on a Luftwaffe squadron attacking from an adjacent hex, then we would draw and use the side with a white number, which means there would only be, this particular bandit would only attack twice. So we resolve our bandit attacks. We draw 3 bandits in this particular case because there was a bandit 1 trait on our target here. And then we would determine the flak attack on our groups. So in this case we rolled 2 dice, rolled a 10 and a 6. So that's, the 10 is 3 points of damage and the 6 is 1 point of damage. Let's see if that was against our what is that against? So 301st, which is a B17 group, so it would be 9 and 5. So no damage and 3 points of damage against our 301st. So we would place a -3 on that counter. And now we want to roll our die to determine our damage against the target. So we have 2 different types of bombs in this case. So the blue die would be for the M30 and the gray die would be for the incendiary. So we rolled a 9 for the incendiary, so we hit the target with our incendiary. So we would put the incendiary counter in, increase the target damage, and we would go ahead and resolve the attacks for each of our other bomber groups, again applying damage to the target. And if we do more than 14 points of damage, then that target is destroyed, and we would get our 3 victory points. And we would also, because this is an aircraft factory target, remove our 3 supply counter from the aircraft factory track. All right, one more quick thing I forgot to mention. When our Luftwaffe squadrons attack, we'll flip it over onto the rearming side. If the squadron is in the hex that our bomber group is in, or mission group is in, we would set it to a side of 1. If, for example, the Luftwaffe response had been high or all out, then we would flip it over to the 3 side that's up. And then every turn we move, we would decrement this. So in this case, let's go from 1 to 0, we flip it. These would go to 2, then we fly back here, it would go to 1, and then make it to the UK base. So these 2 squadrons would not attack our mission group again on the return flight back. So for the month we have 4 weeks, so we could conceivably fly 2 missions per week. So we could run a total of 8 total missions in June, hopefully destroying several targets along the way, including hopefully some secondary mission cards, vehicle factories, to help us get to our goal of destroying 8 VP factory points. And then at the end of the month, we would then go through and determine how many Luftwaffe squadrons are placed onto the map. So let's say we destroyed 3 of the aircraft factory targets, and we have 7 new Luftwaffe squadrons that would be potentially deployed to the map. So we would get our 7 squadrons, roll for each squadron to determine where it gets placed. So in this case, on a roll of 1, it would be placed into the reserve. On a roll of 2 or 3, it would be placed in the Mediterranean theater. On a roll of 4, it would be placed on the Russian theater. On a roll of 5+, it would be placed on the map. But again, we have a reserve -1, so we can subtract 1 from that. So we would roll 7 times, so 1 would be reserve. 3 would be a 2, so that would be put in the med. 6 would be Europe. 5 would be Russia. Reserve. So we would be placing two squadrons on the map. So 18 and 13. So, which is not too bad. Also, before I had done that, I would have rolled to see if there was any changes to the theater. Again, on a 2 or minus, it would retreat. On a 9+, it would advance. No modifiers in this particular turn. So I would put the counters, squadron counters here. So out of our 7, 5 of them either went to a theater or to a reserve. On the end of next month, then when I make my theater roll, I would subtract 2. Because I have 2 squadrons that went here, I would subtract 2 from my roll for the Russian theater. But again, depending on the outcome of my secondary mission, at the end of the second month, I might be able to either add 3 to either the Med or the Russian theater, or I would be forced to subtract an additional 3 from the Russian theater. As I mentioned, I would get replacement points, which I can use to repair damage from my groups. Once a group gets up to a certain level, skill level, there is a reassign number. So if I had a B-24 group, in this case that was an ace, I would have to roll for this group, and on a 9 or 10, this group would be reassigned, which means I would lose my bomber group. It would be removed from the game, and I wouldn't be able to use that group anymore. But I can use my weekly SO points to purchase additional bomber groups. So I think that's it for the overview. Didn't want to go into super detail about the game online, both on the DVG site and on the BGG site for B-17 Flying Fortress Leader. There is a 2nd edition rule set that basically replaces the rules that came with the original box. Adds some clarifications due to some issues that came up with the original rule set. It is organized a little bit differently. So this is online. I would recommend using this rule set when you go to play the game. All right, that's it. Thank you.